The silent despair. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and silent. As the alien refugee ship drifted through the void, its engines were dead, its lights weak, and inside the halls, fear and hopelessness walked like shadows. The ship had once carried thousands, but now only a fraction remained alive, their faces pale, their bodies weak from hunger and thirst. They had sent distress calls again and again, but the galaxy remained silent as if no one cared. Captain Uran sat in the command chair, his eyes heavy and tired. He looked at the frozen panels, the broken screens, and the dimmed lights around him. Every beep of the dying systems was like a reminder that time was running out. They had been drifting for days, maybe weeks, with no answer, no rescue. The crew whispered among themselves, their voices filled with fear. Some said the council abandoned them. Others said no one even heard their calls. But Uran knew the truth. No one wanted to help. The galaxy had moved on, leaving them to die. For many, hope had turned into anger. One of the officers, Ralvik, slammed his fist on the console. Why call again? No one is coming, Captain. We are already dead. But Uran only stared at the stars, his voice calm but heavy. We will keep calling. Even silence must break one day. In the lower decks, families huddled together. Mothers tried to comfort their children, telling them stories about safe worlds and kind allies. But even the children no longer believed. Their eyes were hollow, their stomachs empty, their dreams slipping away. Every corridor echoed with coughs, with whispers of despair. The air was stale, the filters failing. Life support was only working at half strength. The silence of space pressed on them all. It was not just the silence of sound, but the silence of being forgotten. Forgotten by the galaxy they had once trusted. Forgotten by allies who had promised friendship. Now they were nothing but a dying light in the endless night. Uran stood by the viewing port looking at the stars. He remembered the days when his people were respected, when their ships flew proudly across trade routes. Now he commanded nothing but a broken shell, carrying the last fragments of a once thriving colony. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Will anyone remember us when we are gone?" But then something strange happened. One of the young technicians, barely more than a child himself, looked at the scanners and frowned. "Captain," he said softly, "there is something." The crew turned their heads. Their eyes suddenly sharp. Uran walked over. "Show me." The screen flickered weakly, struggling to display, but in the emptiness of space, there was a faint shadow moving, not a star, not an asteroid, but something hidden, cloaked in the dark. Ralvik laughed bitterly. "Another ghost? The void plays tricks when you are desperate." But the technician shook his head. "No, this is real. It is moving against the drift. It has power." The silence on the bridge grew heavier. Every heart beat faster, but none spoke. For weeks they had prayed for a miracle, and now something was out there. Uran narrowed his eyes, staring at the dim outline. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there, large, massive, silent. The shadow was not drifting like debris. It was watching, waiting. For a moment, Uran's breath caught in his throat. He thought of the old stories, tales whispered in council halls, stories of a race that had vanished, stories of Terrans, humans. The galaxy had called them dangerous, ruthless, deathworlders, and then they were gone, swallowed by silence. But could it be? One of the crew whispered, "It cannot be. They are extinct. They were exiled centuries ago," another muttered. "If it is them, we are doomed." But deep inside, Uran felt something else, not fear, not doom, but a spark, a flicker of hope he had not felt in weeks. He whispered to himself, "Better a shadow than silence." The ship drifted on, the crew staring at the scanners. The shadow moved closer, still hidden, still silent, and then, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the static-filled speakers crackled. A voice calm and strong echoed through the bridge. "You are not alone." The crew froze, their hearts racing, their breath caught in their throats. The words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than the stars themselves. Uran gripped the console, his voice shaking. "Identify yourself." But the speakers fell silent again. The shadow lingered, massive and dark, watching them. The crew whispered, some in fear, some in awe. Had hope finally returned? Or had death found a new shape? And so, in the endless cold void, silence turned into waiting. Waiting for the shadow to reveal itself. Waiting to see if the voice was salvation, or the beginning of their final despair. Whispers in the dark. The refugee ship floated in silence, its broken hull glowing faintly under distant starlight. Inside the bridge, no one moved, no one breathed too loud. The last words still echoed through their minds. You are not alone. But the speakers had gone dead again, leaving nothing but the hum of failing systems. Fear spread through the crew like fire in dry grass. Some whispered that the voice was a trap. Others claimed it was only madness. Ralvek growled, his voice sharp with fear. This is a trick, Captain. We are hearing ghosts. No one will help us. But Captain Uran's eyes stayed fixed on the faint shadow at the edge of the scanner. It was there, unmoving, waiting, silent. Not drifting like debris, not random like dust. It had purpose. Down in the passenger decks, whispers ran through the corridors. Rumors spread. The humans have returned. Children asked their mothers if the old stories were true. Stories of deathworlders, the humans who could survive anywhere, who fought like storms and burned like suns. Some said humans were monsters. Others said they were saviors, no one knew. Because for centuries the galaxy had believed them gone, but now, the shadow made those stories breathe again. A faint vibration ran through the ship. The crew stiffened, eyes darting. The technician gasped. It's not static, it's scanning us. A ripple of fear spread across the bridge. If it was hostile, the ship could be torn apart in seconds. They had no shields, no weapons. Nothing but empty hands and broken systems, Ralvek spat. Better to die fighting than waiting like prey. But Uran's voice was steady. We have nothing left to fight with, all we can do is wait. Watch. Another burst of static filled the speakers. This time longer, and through the distortion, a voice deeper, stronger came through. Survivors, we hear you, we see you, hold on. The bridge fell silent. The crew looked at each other in disbelief. It was real. A voice of command, calm but powerful. Uran whispered, Who are you? But again silence followed. Then the stars shifted slowly. Like a giant curtain pulling back, the shadow moved. Its outline became clearer, massive, angular, a beast of metal. The bridge lights flickered as the dying scanners tried to read it. What they saw left them breathless. It was not an alien vessel. Not a scavenger ship, not a pirate. It was something far older, far more dangerous, a warship. Ralvek's eyes widened, his voice breaking. No, impossible. The hull was dark, armored with plating the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Scars of ancient battles ran across its surface like silent trophies, and on its side, faint but clear, a symbol long erased from the records. The mark of humanity. Gasps filled the bridge. Some shouted in fear, others wept with relief. Humans, whispered the technician, his voice trembling. The Terrans. They are real. But confusion followed quickly. Why now? Why here? Had they come to rescue? Or to conquer? In the lower decks, the passengers crowded near viewports, eyes wide as they saw the colossal warship drift out of the darkness. Children clutched their parents. Elders whispered prayers, some fell to their knees. Calling it a ghost ship of vengeance, others cried, calling it salvation. The air buzzed with fear and hope tangled together. On the bridge, Captain Uran stood straighter. His voice was low but firm. If they are here, then we are not forgotten. The galaxy may abandon us, but not them. Yet even as he said the words, doubt clawed at his heart. What if the humans had returned, not as saviors, but as executioners? What if mercy had no place in the heart of deathworlders? The refugee ship trembled as beams of light scanned its broken hull. Drones detached from the warship, floating closer like silent watchers. The bridge crew watched with wide eyes. Would they help, or would they tear them apart piece by piece? Then the speakers crackled again. A single line, cold and sharp, filled the ship. Prepare yourselves. No one knew if the words meant salvation, or the beginning of their end. The warship revealed. The words "prepare yourselves" echoed through every corridor of the broken refugee ship. No one moved for several seconds. As if time itself had frozen, then panic broke loose. Whispers turning into cries, fear clashing with fragile hope. What were they to prepare for? Rescue or destruction? On the bridge, Captain Uran kept his eyes fixed on the shadow. It was no longer just a faint outline, it was emerging fully now. The void itself seemed to tremble as the colossal vessel drifted closer. Panels flickered, alarms beeped, their own fragile systems unable to process the sheer size of it. Ralvek's voice cracked with anger and fear. It's a predator, look at it. We are prey in its claws. But Uran lifted a hand, silencing him. No. Look closer, he whispered. And when the scanners steadied for a brief moment, everyone gasped. The warship was unlike anything the galaxy had built in centuries. Its armored hull stretched endlessly, plated in black steel. Glowing veins of energy pulsed across its surface. Live, powerful, its cannons were silent but terrifying. Weapons larger than entire city blocks, and yet, carved deep into its side was a mark. The sigil of Earth, the emblem of humanity, still shining after all these years. The bridge fell silent, every crew member frozen between awe and terror. The stories were true, the humans had not vanished. They had hidden, watching, waiting, building, and now, their warship had risen from the shadows, the voice returned. Calm but heavy with command. Refugee vessel, your suffering has been noted. Your call has been answered. The words struck deep into their hearts. Some began to cry, others whispered prayers. For the first time in weeks, hope burned like fire again. But with hope came fear. Why had they returned now? What did they want? In the lower decks, passengers pressed against the windows. Children pointed with wide eyes. The massive Terran warship filled the stars, blocking out entire constellations. Some of the older survivors whispered in shaking voices. They said the humans were demons, but demons don't bring light, others muttered. No, demons wear the mask of angels. The refugee ship trembled as smaller craft broke away from the Terran warship. Drones and shuttles, sharp and silent, descended like dark birds. They latched onto the broken hull, cutting through dead panels. Moments later, emergency power flickered back on. Air purifiers hummed weakly. Water tanks filled drop by drop. Food packets appeared in storage bays. Supplies the crew had not seen in months. Gasps filled the ship. The humans were not attacking. They were repairing. But their silence made it even more unnerving. They gave aid without words, without demands, without smiles. As if kindness itself was delivered through steel and shadow. On the bridge, Urin spoke with a trembling voice. Why help us? Why now? The comm crackled again. The Terran commander's voice colder than the void. Because the galaxy abandoned you and we do not. Every soul on the ship froze. The words were simple, but behind them was weight, history, and something more, a warning, Ralvek muttered. They speak as if they judge the galaxy itself, Urin whispered back. Perhaps they do. Suddenly, an alarm rang out on their scanners. The technician shouted, multiple signatures incoming! Fast-armed hostile. On the edge of the system, scavenger warships appeared, sleek and hungry. They had followed the distress calls. Not to save, but to feast. Dozens of them circling like wolves, their weapons already hot. The alien crew's hearts sank. The refugees had survived starvation only to die by scavenger fire. But then, the Terran warship shifted. Its engines flared. Its weapons came alive, glowing like suns. The calm voice returned, final and absolute. Stay behind us. The bridge shook with awe for the first time. They realized what stood before them was not just a warship. It was judgment. It was the return of a power the galaxy had buried in fear. And now, that power had chosen to reveal itself in the darkest hour. The void was no longer silent. It waited, heavy with the promise of fire, the weight of humanity. The scavenger fleet closed in, their ships circling like vultures, hungry and merciless. Blades of metal glinted under distant starlight. Weapons charged with cold fire. The refugee ship shook as enemy signals locked onto its weak frame. On the bridge, the crew stared at the screens with wide eyes. They knew what was coming, death stripped apart in the void. Children cried in the lower decks. Mothers held them close, elders whispered last prayers. They had been abandoned once by the galaxy, and now it seemed the void would finish its work. But then the Terran warship moved. It did not retreat. It did not hesitate. It drifted forward. Silent and unstoppable, like a shadow swallowing the stars. The massive hull blocked the scavenger's fire lines, placing itself between predators and prey. The Terran commander's voice cut through the silence again. Stand down or be erased. The scavengers laughed across the comms, their voices sharp and mocking. Humans, ghosts of a dead world, you dare threaten us. They fired without warning, energy bolts streaking toward the warship. The refugee crew braced for impact, but the bolts never touched their hull. A shield unfolded from the human ship, shimmering like a storm made of light. The energy blast scattered, dissolving into nothing. Gasps echoed across the refugee ship. Their own people had never built shields of this kind. Not in centuries, Ralvek whispered. This is not technology. This is something else, something beyond us, the Terran warship responded. Not with words, but with action. Its cannons awakened, glowing veins of power spreading across the dark hull. One shot tore through the void, and with it, A scavenger ship vanished, obliterated in a single strike. No explosion, no wreckage, just silence where it had been. The scavenger fleet faltered, their formation breaking. Fear crackled in their voices. What? What kind of power is this? Another shot followed, then another, each one tearing holes through predators that once ruled the void. The galaxy had forgotten what Terrans could do, but the refugees were seeing it now. Not just strength, but judgment. In the refugee ship's lower decks, children pressed their hands against the windows. They watched as the shadow ship lit up the stars with fire. To them, it was no longer a monster, but a guardian. A protector who stood between them and death itself. And yet, even as hope grew, fear lingered. Captain Uran whispered to himself, "Why do they fight for us? Why risk their power for the forgotten?" He felt awe, but also doubt, because humans never acted without reason. If they had returned, it meant something deeper, something greater than rescue. The battle raged on. Scavengers tried to scatter, but the Terran warship hunted them down. Its drones swarmed like blades, piercing through hulls, ripping engines apart. Every strike was precise, every movement filled with cold purpose. The warship was not just winning, it was teaching the galaxy what it had forgotten. Within minutes, silence returned. The scavenger fleet was gone. Reduced to drifting wreckage, the refugee crew sat frozen, unable to believe what they had witnessed. Weapons that could unmake fleets, shields that no technology matched. Humanity had not returned weaker. They had returned unstoppable. The comm crackled again. "Your safety is secured," the Terran commander's voice said, calm as stone. "But know this, your cries reached us, and so did the silence of those who abandoned you. The galaxy is being judged, and judgment has only begun." Every heart on the refugee ship trembled. Relief mixed with terror. They were saved, yes. But what did it mean if humanity had risen again, not only as rescuers, but as judges? What would the galaxy face if the humans no longer forgave? Uran stood silently, his eyes locked on the massive ship outside. He felt hope for his people, but also dread for what lay ahead. Because the weight of humanity was not mercy alone, it was power, memory, and a promise that could shake the stars themselves. The darkness shattered. The void was quiet again, but it was no longer the quiet of despair. It was the quiet after a storm. Heavy with smoke and silence, the scavenger fleet was gone, broken into dust and twisted wreckage. Their threat had ended in moments, ended by the hand of humanity. On the refugee ship, the survivors trembled. Some cried with joy, others stared in shock. For the first time in weeks, the children laughed as the lights flickered back to life. Air flowed clean, water tanks refilled, food packets stacked in storage. Life had returned, but with it came questions. Why had the humans returned now after centuries of silence? And what would their return mean for the galaxy? On the bridge, Captain Uran stood frozen, staring at the massive warship that filled the stars. It did not move, it did not gloat. It simply waited, silent and steady. He felt gratitude, but also fear. Because nothing this powerful ever appeared without reason. The comm crackled again. The Terran commander's voice, calm but edged with something deeper. "You live because it was right, but remember this. The galaxy turned away. They watched you starve, they watched you die, and we did not." Every word cut sharp. Every survivor knew it was true. The galaxy had abandoned them, but the humans had answered. Ralvek clenched his fists, whispering, "They fight not just for us, but against the silence itself." The crew listened in awe as the Terran voice continued. "Humanity has walked the shadows long enough. No longer the stars will remember us." And then, before anyone could respond, the Terran warship moved. Its engines lit with power so bright it painted the void in fire. The massive vessel turned slowly, scanning the horizon of stars, and for a brief moment, the galaxy seemed smaller under its gaze. The refugee ship trembled as the Terran drones detached, leaving behind supplies and systems that would last them for months. But the humans gave no thanks. No farewell, only action, silent and absolute. They did not ask for loyalty. They did not demand payment. They simply saved and then judged in the lower decks. A child tugged at her mother's arm and pointed. "Look," she whispered, "the shadow ship is leaving." And they all pressed against the windows. They watched the Terran warship fade slowly back into the darkness, its massive frame swallowed by the void once more, like a legend returning to myth. But just before it vanished, the comm spoke one last time. Its words seared themselves into every heart. "This is not the end, it is the beginning. When the stars cry, we will answer. When the galaxy betrays, we will remember. Humanity has risen again, the signal cut, and the warship was gone. Only the stars remained, silent witnesses to history on the bridge. Uran exhaled for the first time in hours. His voice was soft but steady. We were not abandoned. Not by them. The crew bowed their heads, some in tears, some in awe, and somewhere deep inside, every survivor understood a truth that would spread across the galaxy. Humanity had returned not as ghosts, not as exiles, but as shadows of fire, and when they rose, the galaxy itself would tremble. The void no longer felt empty, it felt alive, alive with the weight of a power that had waited in silence, and now had chosen to act. The darkness was shattered, and the stars would never be the same again.